Hi, and welcome to our mini lecture on how to complete a word study. I'm Dr. Brian Babcock, and today we're going to look at the multiple steps that are necessary to perform a complete word study. Now, one of the nice things to know is that you can complete a professional word study while using free online sources. There are lots of places online that we can use, and through this mini lecture, we will explore two sources that you can easily use from anywhere in the world. Now, why do you complete a word study? Now, word studies help us to determine the original meaning of a word in its context. So, word studies should be performed when we don't know or are uncertain about a word's meaning, when a word is particularly significant within a given passage, when you need to differentiate between two words or two or more words in a passage, i.e., synonyms, when you are comparing the use of a word in two particular passages, when you need to clarify a passage that is unclear, and when different translations use different words to render the meaning of a given Greek or Hebrew word. Now, for this mini lecture, I am assuming that you do not fully understand Hebrew or Greek. So you'll be looking at different English translations and then try to determine what the range of meaning is in Hebrew, even though you don't know the Hebrew language. So the first step is to compare the translation of the word in various Bible versions. So we want to check alternate translations, which can help you to understand the meaning of a word as long as you keep a few things in mind. First, be sure to use standard translations. Those are translations that are commonly found across Bible versions. A formal version is a version that tries to do a word-for-word translation of the Hebrew or the Greek. And those are the New American Standard Bible, the ESV, and the Net Bible. Then there are functional equivalents that try to maintain as close to the Hebrew or Greek as possible, but take some liberty to create a flowing English translation. And that would be the New International Version or the NIV Bible. And then finally, there are Bibles that translate using more of a general paraphrastic idea, in that they're not word for word, but they try to communicate the general idea of the Bible, and those would be the New Living Translation or the Message Bible. So first, we want to use a more standard translation that is formal. The New American Standard is a great example. The ESV is another example. And then we want to add a functional equivalent by looking at the NIV. And then finally, we want to round out our understanding of a passage by looking at the New Living Translation or the Message Bible. Now, you can find all of these translations and more at www.biblegateway.com. And so that's a great place to start. And so for this lecture, we're going to look at Genesis 1:28, and the NIV translation reads, God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it, rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, and over every living creature that moves along the ground. Now, you may want to, and in this case we are going to, look at what does subdue the earth mean? What does God mean by that? And so I picked this word because does subdue mean to conquer? Does that mean, and if so, that means that the earth is really something that we can use as we wish. If we want to destroy the earth, that's our prerogative. Or does subdue mean to take over, as in conquest? Are we to destroy and conquer the earth? Or are we to be stewards of the earth? And so how we define or how we understand the Hebrew word behind subdue will give us a theological understanding for mankind's role in regards to the earth. So it's worth our time to understand this word. Now, if we look at the AMP version of the Bible, it says, "And God blessed them, granting them certain authority, and said to them, Be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth, and subjugate it, putting it under your power, and rule over or dominate the fish of the sea." Or the New Living Translation says, "Then God blessed them and said, Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and govern it." So we have three different ideas. There is to subdue, there is to subjugate, and there is to govern. So what one should we understand theologically is mankind's role and authority over the earth? Now, for this study, I'm going to use two websites. The first is BibleHub.com, and the second is BibleStudyTools.com. Both of these have similar information, and we're going to spend a few minutes going through the information you can find on each. But what we're looking for in step 2 is we want to find all the uses of a word within the Old Testament or the New Testament, depending on the passage. This one being an Old Testament passage. And we want to look in something called a concordance. And a concordance is an index where the various occurrences of a given word are listed. You should be sure to use an exhaustive concordance. That is one that lists every occurrence of a given word. So note that exhaustive concordances come in a variety of versions, including the New American Standard, the NIV, and the King James, etc. Be sure that you use the correct version for the steps that you're assigned in your word study. Now here, if we go to BibleHub.com, that's where I'm beginning, and I type in Genesis 1:28, then we're going to get the NIV version of Genesis 1:28, and we're able to click on any word and get more information. So here I'm giving a representation in that red arrow that we're going to click on subdue, and all of a sudden the Englishman's Concordance and the Strong's Concordance pop up onto our screen. And what we can find is on the right-hand side, we see the Hebrew version, and then we see the New American Standard, the earth, and subdue it for Genesis 1:28. We also see Numbers 32:22, Numbers 32:29, Joshua 18:1, and it will show us every occurrence of the word subdue, or the Hebrew word, and as it's translated across different passages. Now, so here in Numbers, we know that in Genesis 1:28 it says to subdue, but in Numbers it says, "And the land is subdued before." Now that's helpful. We know that in fact the word subdue is here, but I want to know the context. So the next step we would do is then go read the entire passage in Numbers 32 to understand how this word is being used. Then we would go to Joshua and look up not just that it says subdued is the way the word is translated, but what is the context of each use? Is it conquest or subdue in terms of battle? Is it subdue in terms of govern? Is it subdue in other types of understandings? So by clicking on it, we now know every verse in the Bible that has this Hebrew word. We then look at the exhaustive concordance on the New American Standard, and it has a primary root. It gives us the definition to subdue, to bring into bondage, and then it tells us throughout the New American Standard Bible how many times it's used with different types of translations. It's used once as assault, once as brought them into, twice to bring them into subjection, and then it's once forced into bondage, once forcing, one subdued, 5 subdued past tense, to subjugate, to trample, to tread our feet, or tread under feet, or underfoot. So we're looking at the word kavash, and we have seen that it is a verb. We see that it is generally translated as to subdue. We see with the Strong's Concordance that it is to bring into bondage, to force, to keep under, to subdue, to bring into some subjugation. And all of this is off of the Bible Hub website. So once we understand what verses this word is used in addition to ours, and we have a general understanding of how that word is understood, we now want to evaluate each of the uses in the Hebrew Bible. So we want to create a chart with all the occurrences of the word in the left column and space for comments in the right column to understand the context of how the word is being used. So to help with that, we might want to go to BibleStudiesTools.com. And if you're using that website, you're going to want to click on the little toggle, which is the menu or settings button. And then under the scripture formatting, we want to click on small, font Helvetica, and most importantly, we want to click on Strong's numbers, because that is the number of the Hebrew word. And so we then click on it, and we have another website that gives us all kinds of information about Strong number 3533, which is kavash. It tells us that it's used once in Genesis, twice in Numbers, once in Joshua, once in 2 Samuel, once in 1 Chronicles, once in 2 Chronicles, etc. And then we want to analyze each time that word is used in the Hebrew Bible. You'll also notice that this website gives us a basic definition to subject, to subdue, to force, to keep under, and to bring into bondage. It says that in this kal or nifal or pl or hifil are different tenses in Hebrew. So for this, you don't need to worry about what those mean, but kal is more of a present understanding. Nifal is more of a reflexive understanding. So you can see in different tenses of Hebrew or aspects of Hebrew how the word is translated. So we want to then look at Numbers 32, 21 to 23 in order to get an idea for how this word is used in different Hebrew passages. So beginning in verse 21, and if all of you who are armed cross the Jordan before the Lord until he has driven his enemies out before him, then when the land is subdued before the Lord, you may return and be free from your obligation to the Lord and to Israel, and this land will be your possession before the Lord. But if you fail to do this, you will be sinning against the Lord, and you may be sure that your sin will find you out. Now, it seems like we've done 3 verses of reading in order just to understand one word, and that's exactly correct. I want to begin to look at the context of the word, and not just that Numbers 32 says, or chapter 32, verse 22, translates the word as subdued. I can see that in 2 seconds. But I want to back up and say, okay, in this entire passage, how is subdued understood? And we see here that God is driving out his enemies in warfare and then is giving the land to the Israelites. So subdued has 2 components here. One is God is driving out the enemies and giving the land under the authority of the Israelites. And I want you to do that for every single verse where this word translated subdued is used, and that will give you a much better idea as to the context of the word. So in verse 32, or verse 22 of chapter 32, we find that the observation is that the land is coming under God's control. In Numbers chapter 32, verse 29, it is understood to take control of the land. In Joshua 18, it's a pacified location for a meeting. And in 2 Samuel 8, the land is conquered in battle and brought into control by David. So for step 3, we want to create loose categories to describe the word's usage. And that is to make an attempt to group them according to the broad categories of usage. You can use the definitions or glosses from these broad categories, or you can try to develop your own based upon the observations made from your own analysis. In this case, for Genesis 1:28, the word subdue, I am finding that there are 3 broad categories of understanding. The first is control, the second is slavery, and the third is adherence to the rules of the court. And you can see the passages that I've put under each of these broad understandings. Step 4, compare similar words. Now that we have done a fairly good analysis and understand how this word is used, we now want to look at our original passage and see if there are any other words that we might need to explore in order to truly understand what God is trying to communicate. So after you have looked up all the verses and placed them into broad classifications, you should go back and determine what words occur alongside the word you are studying. For instance, subdue is associated with the word for rule in Genesis 1:28. So now we should go back and look up rule as part of our word study. You may also wish to study some of the synonyms for a particular word, as well as the words verbal or nominal cognates. So in our passage, in the NIV, it said, God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it, rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the sky, and every living creature that moves on the ground. Now, if I were to do a grammatical analysis of this passage, I might determine that, in fact, that second sentence explains the first sentence. And by that I mean, God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it. And in fact, God is saying, what do I mean by subdue it? I mean that you should rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky and over every living creature that moves along the ground. So the second verse actually helps to explain our word. And so we need to understand what God means by rule over in order to truly understand what God means by subdue. So we have a secondary study that helps to determine our passage. Step 5, we want to look in the passage you are studying for clues concerning the word's meaning. Take a good look at your passage and ask yourself whether the author has provided any sort of clues that may help you to understand the meaning of the word. Look for synonyms that may give you some insight concerning the word. And in fact, I'm going to go back because that's exactly what we have found. That when we look at 128 in context, we find that the rule over sentence is an explanation of the subdue sentence. So by looking at the context and grammar of our passage, we've picked up some clues to understand the meaning. Also note any words or phrases used in association with the word you are examining. For instance, in Genesis 2:15, the phrase to till it and keep it appears. While you could look these words up separately, it may be best to note where they are used together. Some concordances list these collections, whereas others may require you to cross-reference the two different entities or entries. Step 6, examine the book in which the word appears. See if the same word is used by the author in the same book. If so, then we might better understand what the author intended by the use of the word. And by that I mean each of us uses words in various ways. And if you were to look at all of my lectures and examine a word that I use frequently, other lectures that I do may in fact explain how I'm using the word today. So when Moses writes a book and he uses the word subdue, we may find that Moses is the best person to in fact translate his own word for us. So we want to look at other books that Moses wrote in order to give that preferential treatment in our analysis. Next, examine the author's other books which have the same word. So in this, Genesis for step 6 and the rest of the Pentateuch for step 7. So here we see Genesis 1:28 uses the word, Numbers 32 uses the word in verse 22 and 29. Step 8, examine the word as used in the rest of Scripture. So we've looked at Genesis, we've looked at the other books written by Moses. Now we're going to look at the rest of the Old Testament. Examine occurrences in other Old Testament books. And here are a few examples that are similar to Genesis 1:28. Joshua 18, 2 Samuel 8, 1 Chronicles 22, 2 Chronicles 28, all use the same word kavash. And so we want to do a study of these passages. Step 9. We've looked at the Hebrew, but the Old Testament is also translated in Greek. This secondary translation is called the Septuagint. And so we're going to want to step back and look at what Greek word is used in the Old Testament Septuagint. So look up how the word is used in the Septuagint or other contemporary literature. Once you know the Hebrew word for each Greek word, you can do a Google search and translations may be found. Bible Hub is also a great resource. Just look up the Septuagint in Bible Hub. Step 10 is a really important step. And on your analysis worksheet, it says optional. However, I don't think it's very optional. It's a secondary sources. Once you have completed your entire analysis, in step 10, I want you to look at commentaries, monographs, do an ATLA search, do a Google search, but see if you can find outside scholars who have analyzed your word and will help to give you, one, a cross-check to make sure that your understanding is correct, but two, they may give you some historical context to your passage and to your word that are helpful in your analysis. Step 11 is to provide a preliminary interpretive description of the word you have studied. Using the data you have compiled, provide a 2 to 3 sentence summary of what you feel the word means. For instance, to subdue reflects the act of taking control of someone or something. But in a number of contexts, this term should be understood as stewardship and management and not merely exploitation. Finally, when these steps are complete, you should provide a summary of what you've learned. You should prepare a conclusion paragraph summarizing how the study informs your interpretation of the passage. In addition, it is always a good idea to add some personal reflection on what you have learned and how this impacts your life or ministry. Now it's your turn. We finished the mini lecture, and you have a worksheet for these assignments, and I want you to go back and have fun determining what your word means in its context and as desired by God. Have a great day.